Hello, this is the Yes California Big Time meeting. We're dressed up today and we're doing high level discussion. For those members who are in the waiting room, we'll let you in just a few minutes. We want to have an exclusive interview with Jeremy Zogby of Zogby Polling, our special guest, and then we'll let the members in and have a discussion from there. But just to get started, so Jeremy Zogby is part of Zogby Polling. Zogby Polling has been around for decades, calling presidential elections and other elections. Jeremy's become a personal colleague and friend of mine. And we like to talk about polls, what they mean, and dissecting the data at a level most people don't get into. You can catch Jeremy on his podcast weekly with his dad, where they go super in depth, all the way down the rabbit hole on all the polls. Very informative. If you love data and you love number crunching, I highly recommend you watch that podcast. He and his dad will go at it on the numbers and what they mean. And what I love is that you take hard data and then you provide different interpretations of how to see it. The show never ends with, this is what this means. It's, here's a take, here's another reasonable take. And then you or your dad will sometimes throw in a third take from someone else who's not even on the show. So if you love numbers, I like the fact that you point to the magic of the polling and numbers, but you also don't just say that polling automatically equals one result. It's somewhat interpretive. It's an art, more of a science. I'm going to shut up and turn over the thing. Jeremy, what did we talk about yesterday? What was our conversation about? What's going on in the news? Why are we having this conversation right now?
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'm really happy to be here. So we were talking about there has been no shortage of talk about national divorce, secession, separation, however you want to call it. It's all the same thing. And we were both reading an article over the weekend that quoted a poll that I had done back in 2020. And so I was just, obviously I grew up with polling. I've been doing field research since I was 10. And I've also, always loved history. I taught history, so everything always comes back to history. And so when we were talking about this this one article by Ryan McMacken, who cited my poll, he alluded to the fact that this is not something that's going to go away. This has the potential to go more popular. And so I just brought in a little bit of a historical background to it by saying, look, there are monuments all around us. We live with history. The ideas of the founding fathers and other leaders that come before us are constantly at play with us. And so this is really the ghost of Jefferson and the ghost of Lincoln playing out. And so with that backdrop, you can never really get rid of this idea of separation and independence and secession, because the nation was founded on it. It may become more popular at times, it may become a little bit less, but it's never going to go away. But we think that it's increasingly popular. So I'll start out with that, and if you want to drill down any more, please, with some other questions.
Well, we just showed the article by Ryan McMacken for the Mises Institute on the top 3 reasons you should take secession seriously. Here are some of the key quotes that Jeremy Zogby is pointing out. Mackin says, according to Zogby's 2020 poll on secession, favorable attitudes towards secession decline as the polled group gets older. Continuing that quote, in the 18 to 29-year-old group, a majority, 52%, think states have a legal right to secede. In the over 65 group, the number is only 23%. Finally, concluding that quote, in other words, the dogma of national unity is a dogma of older generations. Not only is secession increasingly mainstream, but it may be the wave of the future as well. That was Ryan McMacken of the Mises Institute this week talking about you and your polling. Does he have it right? Is that how you feel?
Well, when you've got 52% of 18 to 29-year-olds, now in the media, when we think of, and by the way, 18 to 29 is going to consist of younger millennials and older Gen Z. And so when you think about that group, you think about, mainstream media will have you think about Bernie Bros and Bernistas and I want my socialism. And, maybe to what extent that's true, there's definitely truth to that, but there's this nuance where you contrast them against the older generation who grew up with my country, right or wrong, and patriotism. Their fathers, their uncles, maybe for the younger baby boomers, their grandfathers fought in World War II, maybe even going further back, World War I, and this is a no-no. But the fact of the matter is, here we are in this intense landscape, hyper partisanship, and I think with younger people, and by the way, this is where polling gets into narrative, where you're interpreting the data, you're interpreting the zeitgeist and the general sense of what's going on, and this is a crude term that I'm going to use, but it's pretty obvious in this intense landscape. Political sadomasochism. This like, my party's going to win, my ideology is going to win, and you're going to bow down to it. And what that data is telling us is that there's this sensibility of, look, you live your life, I live my life. I don't want to die for anything. I want to live my life. I want you to live your life. 52% who are saying if a state wants to go, let them go. Is it worth getting shedding blood?
And now, one of the interesting things that you told me, I wanted to ask if you could explain this, was that McMacken was using, originally when he was writing this article, he was using older poll numbers. You contacted them and said, hold on, brother, I've got even newer poll numbers. What did the older poll numbers show, and what did the newer poll numbers show?
Yeah, so and that's something I do all the time when I see people citing older Zogby data. I'll say, no, you got to use the newer data, which is something I think we all naturally would do. But he had cited, and obviously this is a trend that we've been tracking going back years. So we're on top of this when we follow many sources of information. That's right. The thing you got to know about Zogby's. We're independent. We consume both mainstream media and independent media so that we can know the trends. So I ran into something. Actually, somehow he linked it on my website, johnzogbystrategies.com, citing the 2018. And so I have to distinguish that when I asked that question, it dawned on me later on that question was kind of like a softer secession. It was something like, which statement do you agree with, A versus B? And it was like, if the majority of residents within a state want to have their own say over their destiny, let them have it. Now, that's somewhere between nullification and secession. And it dawned on me that, well, I'm not getting at the heart of it. So let me ask flat out. And so I did that in 2020. And I asked flat out, do you think it is legal? Does a state have a legal right to secede? So there you go. No skirting around it. Secession. So the difference with the previous softer question, I'm quoting off the top of my head, I believe was 39% overall. Overall likely voters, 39% agreed with that softer secessionist statement. This time around in 2020, 36% agreed with the flat-out secessionist statement, and that's within the margin of error. They were both a poll of 1,000 likely voters, plus or minus 3.2 percentage points. So you're at the same point, basically.
So you had one poll a few years ago talking about nullification, a softer way to present the topic of secession, and it showed around 40-ish%. And then you had another poll where you just straight up asked, I mean full-blown secession, and the numbers roughly came in within the margin of error. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, it was just below. The previous one was just below 2 out of 5, 39%. And this one was 36%. So not much difference there in that language. So people were interpreting the first one as secession. That's how I understand it.
And then so you took a soft way of presenting the language, and then you hardened up the language, and you still got roughly the same percentage, at least within the margin of error, over a time period, which theoretically could suggest that people are there now. They're ready to rip off the Band-Aid and have that real discussion about the ugly sore underneath it. Whereas before, maybe they weren't there yet. They weren't really ready to see the full gore of the sausage factory, as they talk about with politics.
Well, okay, so let me give some historical perspective on the data. And so there, you can go back and you can, whatever search engine you use, you can find a Zogby poll going back to 2013, 2014, which I'm going to say was high 20s, maybe 30%. And so that was back then. And so when the polling that I did in 2018 and 2020 was under the Trump administration. So what I would like to know is in 2021 under the Biden administration, would it be the same? Would it be less? Or would it be more? I'm going to, in the next opportunity I get, I'm going to ask the question because it needs to be revisited. And Biden has had we're over his first 100 days. We're past, we're into his fourth quarter. So I'm going to ask that question. I can't predict. If I had to follow my intuition, I would say it would be at least about the same number. I don't think it would go down. But don't forget the key data point in that, as Ryan McMacken pointed out, is the young crowd, the 52% who agreed with it.
Right. So a couple numbers I'm going to throw at you. So obviously you saw the University of Virginia Sabato poll everyone's talking about, with 52% of Trump voters saying they support secession, and somewhere around 43 or 46, 47% of Biden voters, just under half, and so close to the half margin, it's within the margin of error. So I hope you do that poll, because we're basically looking at half of Biden voters and half of Trump voters. Again, according to the University of Virginia Sabato Center for Politics polling that came out over the last 2 months, showing support for secession. That's almost half on both parties during the most polarized electorate since 1865. Looks like good fishing.
So what I can say is, I don't know his polling, but I know of Larry Sabato, and Larry Sabato is he is a giant in the field of political science. He's easily, recognized as one of the top figures, scholars in political science. But I'm not familiar with his polling, but I would imagine he's probably a solid pollster. But obviously, we're going to trust our track record more. So yeah, more to come on that. What else is on your mind, or what else do you want to ask or talk about?
So I wanted to ask you a couple things. So let me just show the Sabato Center, and then I want to ask you specifically about the poll that you brought. So here is the Sabato Center poll, Center for Politics, Sabato's Crystal Ball, University of Virginia, Center for Politics. And this is the one that was showing 52% of Trump voters and 47% of Biden voters. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about was this. Poll findings on fear and distrust amongst Biden voters. So the news is talking a lot about how 52% of Trump voters and 47% of Biden voters were supporting secession. What they're not spending a lot of time on is these other questions that were asked by the same poll. Quote, I have come to view elected officials from the opposition party as presenting a clear and present danger to American democracy. 80% of Biden voters, 84% of Trump voters.
Let me just point something out to you real quick. Can you go back up?
Yeah.
Now, the 80% is huge, but look at next to that, the strongly agree. Strongly agree is always important to look at because of the intensity. So in both camps, a majority strongly, not just somewhat, the 80% and the 84 are combined somewhat and strongly. You have majority territory in both of those where the strong sentiment crosses. So that's very key. Sorry, continue.
No, please. This is why I wanted to talk to you. So he's pointing out somewhat strongly agree. You have strongly agree, not just sort of agree, not just, if you had to pick two options. This is strongly agree. So they're getting into levels of gradient of like support for this concept. And what Jeremy's pointing out is that it's not just 80% support in general given two options. It's 80% strongly agree, which means it's extra intense.
80% strongly plus somewhat, but the 51% of the Biden supporters, 51% majority say strongly agree with that statement.
Okay. So
57 of
Okay. So we're looking at 80 to 84% who somewhat agree. But when we look at strongly agree, as Jeremy's pointing out, it's still a majority of all Biden voters and a majority of all Trump voters who strongly agree.
One more correction. Sorry. I do this for a living.
Yeah.
80% is combined somewhat and strongly.
Okay. 80%, lot of support. 51% strongly agree for Biden voters. 57% strongly agree for Trump voters. That's over half for both sides on the opposition is seen as a clear and present danger to American democracy. The way that they would typically talk about American enemies. Here's another term where they ask the same question. I believe that Americans who strongly support the opposition party have become a clear and present danger to the American way of life. 75% of Biden voters generally agree. 43% strongly agree. 78% of Trump voters generally agree. 47% of Trump voters strongly agree. 47% is probably within the margin of error. So these again are for the questions on from the Sabato Crystal Center, University of Virginia, Sabato's Crystal Ball Center for Politics polling that showed 52% of Trump supporters supported this and 47% of Biden voters. Before we get to that, you had this poll, right? This is the one you were talking about?
Yep.
What is this asking overall? This was the poll you made in
2020.
Okay, so this is the one that Brian McMacken is referencing?
Yep, July 15th. There you go.
Okay, July 15th, Intelligence Seer by the Zogby Strategies. July 15th, this is the poll McMacken was pointing out showing lack of support for being opposed to secession, and that it changes over time based upon age. So I think you said it was on page 5. Here's page 5. So
right there. Yep.
Yeah. States seceding from the Union is illegal, and any attempt should be put down by military intervention. Or statement B, states have the legal right to declare independence from the federal government, and there should be no military intervention. Those who said it was illegal, 39%. Those who said you have the legal right to do it, 36%. But my favorite thing is we also looked at the not sure of 25%. And I know this is my opinion. I get that. But in my opinion, when you talk about secession, it's like talking about a violent bank robbery. You're not asking people, do you want olives on your pizza? Do you want vanilla flavored ice cream? This is a huge decision. And for 1/4 of the people that say they're not sure, I always like to add these two together. Yeah, let's do it versus maybe you could convince me to do it, bumps this number up to 61%, I believe. 36, 25.
Yep.
So 40% of America saying, hell no, don't want it at all. But that also means about 61% is saying I'm either for it or could be convinced. How do you see this poll?
So, I mean, that's an interesting philosophical question, and I've heard you make that case, and I've really given a lot of thought to that. How I read the data is the not sure camp is the battleground. Okay. That 25% is where, column A who say it's illegal and column B who say it's legal are, imagine them in two different camps. There's 3 camps, and so here's one camp, and here's two, kind of like a caucus. Come our way. And so who's going to win that 25% over? Would it split 12 and a half to go to one camp? Would 20% go one way and 5% go the other? That's how I view it, because to me, not sure is a state of mind where you're essentially saying, I'm undecided. And so I haven't given much thought to it. It's too heavy for me right now. I don't have enough information, but they are the battleground to gain. And so that's how I view it. But looking at what Larry Sabato put out, and knowing that Larry Sabato is a giant in the field of political science, and seeing those numbers that we just looked over, I'm not putting money on this. I'm just saying it would be hard to imagine. It would be hard to imagine that the legal didn't jump up a little bit, because both sides of Trump voters and Biden voters are saying each other, you're a threat. So it really just comes down to that nasty term that I'm using, political sadomasochism. Yeah. How many people really just want to dominate the other side and want to force them to live under their vision of the country? Yeah. Go back to the young. The young don't seem to be down with that. So,
wow, you sounded like a young person saying that. So getting into that, here we go. 52% were for secession, 18 to 29 years old. This is what McMacken was pointing out. Here's 52%, 18 to 29 years old. But when we look at 65 plus, it drops to 23%. So you literally go from over half of the youth, everybody under 30 is supportive of secession, with 15% undecided. And then when you get to over 65, it drops to about 20%, or, a reduction of like 200%. Mm-hmm. Am I getting this right? Is this what McMacken was pointing out, was that the youth seem to majority support this? And when you go over 65, it's like 4/5 are against this.
I'm sorry, I was just looking at a question. I'll get to that later. No, you're right. But I would also point you to regionally, which we have laid out there.
Yep.
And the numbers,
there it is.
The West Coast, but the rest are within a 10-point margin. I would point you to the political party that, remember, this was under Trump. This isn't just a Democrat thing. Even Republicans are saying it, and so are independents, although independents are less, which is interesting. But yeah.
What I find interesting is this 44%. So here's the West, which I know they always, lump other states in with California, but California is going to be the dominant share of any conglomeration of states that make up the West, simply because of the size of its population. I'm not sure what percentage it is here, but this is really 44% of a poll for this region made up majority of California population. What I find interesting is that when we compare that 44% to this one, damn, wrong poll. Let me pull up the other poll. 1 second here, sorry.
No problem.
Bright. There it is. All right, so this is what I wanted to show everybody real quick, and then I want to ask your opinion, Jeremy. Here's the Zogby poll. West Coast, or West, 44% think secession should be legal. This poll came out in July 15th, 2020. Here's another poll talking about secession. This came out in June 2020, right around the same time as the Zogby poll. So here's another poll, Brightline Watch, June 2021, right next to July, and support for secession in the West Coast is 47%. So here's a poll taken within a month of the Zogby poll showing support for the West is at 47%. Here's the Zogby poll, basically within a month, showing support for secession is at 44%. Am I just crazy, or does it seem a little bit interesting that we have two totally different polls, roughly taken around the same time, roughly doing an aggregate of states as the West, and roughly showing percentages that are within the margin of error, 44% in one and 47% in the other. Am I just tripping, or does that mean something?
Numbers don't lie.
I love you, bro. You almost make this too easy. Okay, a couple other questions. So one of the things you're saying is that support for secession is very high with the youth. It's very low with the elderly. We have been saying that for 5 years here at Yes California. What we said was that there's nothing positive to remember about America for anyone who's basically under 40. And what we meant was, you don't remember the lunar landing, right? You don't remember the only good thing that America did during that time that you remember was the Cold War ending and the Berlin Wall falling. For most of the people who are 35 and younger, what they remember was 9/11, the failed Iraq War, allies turning away, the pandemic, spying on everybody, the Patriot Act. And so you have to go all the way back to your heyday was the 1960s to really have a period where, as you were becoming an adult and developing your identity, there was a guy on the moon and they were fighting communism and they landed freedom and JFK was around giving speeches and MLK did his thing. But over time, you get to the 90s, there really wasn't much good stuff. I mean, basically from the 2000s on, it's been failure after failure after failure. You can look at the 1990s and see the Cold War ending and Russia falling, and maybe there's something there. But you go from the 2000s on to the last 20 years, if your identity was made up as a young adult, what great thing did America do that you can show to? Now, people over 65 have many things. But as America continues to not do so great, I mean, look at Afghanistan, look at the infrastructure bill, look at the debt ceiling, look at inflation, look at the loss of allies, look at the fact that the European Union is still talking about forming something other than NATO, even with Biden in, because they're not sure about America's stability. I think it backs up what you're saying. Like, what future do we have to encourage the youth to believe in America? I want to throw a couple other polls at you. So 2014, I know this is not as scientific as your polling. American real estate company Movato looks at data across America and concludes California is the least patriotic of all states. 2013, I know it's not as scientific as you. Car sales across America are looked at by True Car Sales data and concludes that California and Hawaii are the least patriotic. Now, here is a reputable poll. 2015, the Gallup poll showed that the group of all of America with the least amount of patriotism to America was young people between 18 to 29. There's that same age cohort located in the West. So, strange coincidence that the West keeps showing support for secession, that the youth show support for secession, and that we have polls from just a few years ago showing the total lack of patriotism amongst youth in the West? Or are these a confluence of factors kind of pointing at the same thing?
Well, I mean, without that data, just go back to definition. And obviously the West Coast is, generally speaking, by and large, the most progressive part of the country, from Washington down to Oregon, down to California. And by nature, progressive and very liberal tend to be more international in their outlook, whereas conservative tend to be more national. So, I mean, right there, just by the definition alone, and then there, of course, there's the data to support. I haven't looked at those reports. Gallup is, obviously the biggest tree in all of the forest, and obviously very reputable. But they show it, and so, yeah, I believe it.
Just to back this up, and may not have to buy the thing, but here's Movato. Yes, they did that poll 2014. It was covered by ABC7. It showed California the least patriotic. Here's the used car data, also showing in 2013, showing California the least patriotic. And then here's the Gallup poll. smaller majority extremely proud to be an American, which also showed that the youth cohort was the lowest pride of anyone. There it is, 18 to 29. And that when you look at the West Coast in general. So everything seems to add up. I want to ask you one last question, if I may.
Sure.
So this is in the Ryan McMacken article. Ryan McMacken, of the Mises Institute, in his article called 3 Reasons to Start Taking Secession Seriously, which came out this week, he references your poll, talks about it in great amount. He's saying that the topic of secession has gone mainstream for this reason. I'm sorry. You have the poll from Brightline Research showing support for secession. Then you have the poll from Sabato Crystal Center at University of Virginia showing support for secession. And then you have Glen Beck, Sarah Silverman, Stephen Holt, a sitting member of government, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, a sitting member of government, all talking about secession. Now, I'm not familiar with sitting members of government talking about secession since 1860. And McMacken was pointing out that Stephen Holt from Iowa and Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, those are not states right next to each other, are both talking about the legitimacy of this concept. When we have politicians talking about the idea of national divorce, when we have 2 polls pointing at support for it, when we have people like Rich Lowry and David French, also well-known conservatives, speaking about it, and when we also have Ryan McMacken, Michael Malice, and Brian McClanahan, other conservatives, speaking about it, can we say we're approaching mainstream discussion? You have sitting members of Congress, elected officials, famous people, 5 at least super famous conservatives speaking about this, and 2 polls also showing the legitimacy of this concept within the last year's time frame, plus your poll. What say you? Too early to make this conclusion, or this is coming?
I would say that my humble opinion, I would say it hasn't gone mainstream yet. When, I guess the question goes, when will you know it's mainstream? Well, I think it's kind of a rhetorical question. You'll know it goes mainstream when it's being talked about in the mainstream media, right? Or now Sarah Silverman said it. Gwyneth Paltrow, did it in that show on Netflix a year or 2 ago.
That's right. Yes.
But when look for signals such as the power centers, Hollywood and Manhattan and DC, when it really starts to be talked about there, you will know it has truly gone mainstream. But we don't want to define mainstream just by the elite. What about the bottom up? I think it has the potential to go viral. That's what I would leave it at that. It could very well go viral, and that would imply more of a bottom up versus top down. So you got those 2 dynamics. But I'd say if the trend keeps going towards where we're heading in terms of the distrust, the mistrust, the loss of empathy, more people are going to say, I don't want to see bloodshed. I'm not ready to go out in the streets. Maybe there's a more viable option. And maybe it's not just states. Maybe it's counties or cities. Who knows? But I'll end on this note. And this is coming from somebody who studied world and taught world history for 10 years. When have borders and maps ever remained constant? Give me any example of a continent, of a nation. Take 100 years. Tell me when, is it written into law that borders remain constant? That's about the least constant thing you can say in the whole sweep of human history.
Okay. Would you agree that it's new, that when we're looking at the topic of secession, it's new to have a sitting Congress member talk about it. It's new to have a government official talking about it. It's new to have a famous Disney star talk about it. We've never had Glen Beck or another major, at least somewhat of a reputation conservative say, this looks like it's happening. And when we're talking about it, we have 3 different voices McMacken, Malice, and McClanahan opposing French and Lowry, creating something of a national dialogue around this. I could be wrong. That's why I'm asking. I'm not familiar with at least somewhat respected voices actually having this debate in public rather than just going, this is stupid and let's not even talk about it. I mean, actually agreeing with each other, like, we're going to discuss this and debate it opposite versus that's a stupid idea and how silly, and no one rebuts. Are we seeing something approaching a national dialogue, given people like McMacken and Malice and McClanahan debating publicly with people like Lowry and French, given their audiences, or too early to tell?
Well, I guess I would just, and this is a variation of what I said, but going to the ideological spectrum, is that if I were to guess Sarah Silverman's ideology, I would guess that she's pretty progressive. Ryan McMacken, of course, is a something like an anarcho-libertarian. Brian McClanahan, I think, is probably on board. So what I'm saying is this is playing out away from the center and away from mainstream ideology on the right and the left. It's happening here, but you'll know it's gone mainstream when it starts to go this way.
All right. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy man. You got kids. It's Halloween or something about Halloween. Before you go, can you repeat in just 1 minute the statement that you made to me about where your family came from, why they left there, and how that relates to what you see in America today? If you're willing, sir, you do not have to.
No, I'm very open about my family's history. My family, I do have, okay, so let me back up. My grandfather and his brothers and sisters left after World War I. They left Lebanon. There were locusts, there was genocide, there was famine, and there was political oppression from the Ottoman Turks. They came to America and they achieved the American dream. But then there were another wave of Zogbys that fled the Lebanese Civil War. That was a civil war that lasted 25 years. And I grew up with stories that it got so out of control that brother started killing brother. That's not very different from what happened in the American Civil War. There was a lot of fratricide. There was a lot of families that were divided. All of the generals before the Civil War studied at West Point together. You had generals that were rooming with each other at West Point that ended up, charging each other in battles like Bull Run and Gettysburg and Antietam. And so the point is that and I'm not predicting bloodshed, but we know from war that when bloodshed happens, it becomes utterly senseless, and it takes on a life of its own, and it makes no sense. And so I was drawing from that conclusion that I was saying, with the young growing up and having heard stories from Vietnam vets, when they feel like, something is brewing or something is on the horizon, I would imagine that's in the back of their mind. Probably some of those people in the 52% camp who are just like, just let people live their own life. They don't want to see something like that happen. Nobody's ready for something like that to happen. So we need to be very careful about this growing intensity and hyper-partisanship, because don't kid yourself in thinking that it could get out of control. We are not immune to that. We are human, just like other places in the world that have experienced these things.
Gonna let you go. 30 more seconds. This is the poll you took, right? In light of recent events, do you believe America will eventually overcome this current wave of disunity, or America will eventually be pushed towards civil war? What I found terrifying was that the amount of people who said that we will overcome is only 50%. You couldn't even break half thought America was going to survive this. Am I getting this wrong? Is that what that poll says?
No, that's pretty worrisome. You would want to see that closer to 80-90%. And that this is another thing that I will have to track, because I wonder where we're at on that one.
And here's
that's about as much as I could say on that.
Fair enough. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you for coming in, Jeremy Zogby. Check him out, the Zogby Report. As always, if you like data, if you like interpretations, if you like that line between science and art, there's one place to go. Zogby Strategies and the Zogby podcast every Sunday. I always go there, and I always learn something. So, and they do not tell you what to think. You and your dad have different opinions. You are forced to think for yourself. I love that.
And we respect each other. We never, it never gets personal or anything like that. So that's what we're trying to show the country. You can be on opposite ends, but listen to each other.
Or it'll turn into Lebanon. Thank you, Jeremy Zogby. Appreciate it. I'm going to kick you from the studio now, but you can keep watching. We're going to have
Take care. Thanks for having me on. Take care.
Always.
Bye.
Okay, bringing in new people to the studio. Robert, Jason, quick comments. What'd you think about that? What startled you? What scared you? Or did it all seem reasonable and make sense?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was posting in the private chat there, here and there. It stood out to me that the West is like way different than the rest, and that when I was looking at those numbers from 2020, and I had posted it and asked, and Jeremy said, no, it's impossible to, come to that conclusion based on how the question is asked or whatever, but which I do agree with. But it was looking to me like, other than the Republicans, the folks who had less on the unsure side, it looked like the unsure was going to the legal and not to the think it's illegal. So like, I was seeing it as the more they know, the more they're for it.
Interesting.
But I do, again, point out, and here I'll read it from the chat. He said, I would say there would be no way to determine that, given the nature of how the not sure is undecided. So,
Robert. Oh, sorry, Jason. Robert, did you have any thoughts? What did you think? Okay, well, while we're waiting for Robert, I'm going to show a little bit what we were talking about. I really respect Jeremy Zogby, and I thought that his point about the people speaking it are not super mainstream was relevant, but I somewhat disagree. So we have three people now. 3 Reasons to Start Taking Secession Seriously by McMacken, Dissecting National Review's Article Against National Divorce by Malice, and Rich Lowry Doesn't Like Secession by McClanahan. All 3 of those articles are attacking Rich Lowry's article on national divorce is poisonously stupid. And Dr. King had said that the key step to achieving a goal in a social movement is negotiation and agreeance. Now, he did not mean that everybody agrees on the solution, but that you have to agree on what the problem is. Because if you keep dancing around the problem and redebating it, you can't ever get into 2 camps and you can't ever start to fight. And so that's why King said, out of the 4 stages leading to success, the 4th one being activism, the 1st one being looking at the facts, the 2nd step which actually starts the conflict, is called the negotiation phase. I view this as negotiation. So you have Rich Lowry, National Divorce's poisonously stupid idea on October 10th, and then you have The Great American Divorce by David French. National Review is a well-respected magazine. Now, maybe conservatives don't like it, but it's well known as the conservative voice, at least amongst liberals, which is at least half the country. David French is famous. Both of those guys are repeating the same arguments against even discussing national divorce. And then there's 3 conservatives that are arguing against them. So when you have 2 people saying, don't do that, and then 3 people saying, yes, let's do that, that's a level of national discourse that has never existed in American history regarding the topic of secession since 1860. Now, is that enough to break through the ceiling of into mainstream acceptance? I don't know. That's where I'm debating with Zogby. He's saying not there yet. Maybe that's true. But I also find it interesting that, here's Glen Beck. Glen Beck is famous. And when Glen Beck started talking about national divorce, people weren't saying, oh, did you see the Glen Beck episode where he talked about national divorce? They were saying, oh my God, Glen Beck talked about national divorce. Him even mentioning the topic was seen as legitimization. Sarah Silverman is famous. And I don't think people appreciate the aggressive nature of her parent company. The Disney Channel destroys careers of people who say things they don't like. She is a Disney Channel actor, and they said absolutely nothing when she supported national divorce. Sarah Silverman could insult the way something looks and offend some ethnic group. Disney Channel would be all over her in 50 seconds. She said, I support a breakup of America. They said nothing. Glen Beck is known by all of them. When he speaks, they listen. Maybe they don't agree. And he talked about national divorce. And I got to tell you, I know a lot of conservatives from around America. They were going, oh my God, Glen Beck even mentioned this. Here's Sarah Silverman talking about it, and Disney says nothing. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, a sitting Congress member, does a poll about it. And here's Stephen Holt, another government member, talks about it. This hasn't happened before. Let's take you in a little bit in depth, just so you can see. Once you see the original sources, so here's Rich Lowry.
While you're pulling that up, may I say one backing up point is that when they say that there's no point in talking about it, Zogby polling clearly shows from 2018 to 2020, the trend was in the 35 to 40% support of secession, 35 to 40% range from 2018 to 2020, and it stayed roughly in that zone. So that tells us that about a third of all Americans support, like right now, support the legality of independence, secession, self-determination, yada yada. That means that anyone who's saying, oh, you're dumb for thinking about it, or only stupid people think about this, or, it's not even worth it. Well, you are totally insulting, discounting, and trying to discredit about 1/3 of America. 1 in 3 Americans. So it goes right along the line of, the 50% versus the 50%. Those who hate Trump and those who hate Biden, right? It's one half versus the other. Well, you know what the next largest demographic in America is that actually is made up of parts of both of those halves? Those who support it independent. So definitely can't discount it, discredit it, definitely can't look away. And if your job is to pay attention to important things, you need to keep your eyes locked on this.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go to some additional news. Speaking about national divorce, so I'm going to cover this now. In the news, Texas, Daniel Miller the secessionist leader of Texas, is going to run for the lieutenant governor post in Texas. The lieutenant governor post in Texas, because of the way the system is set up, is seen as the top executive. So I'm not going to get into that. But basically, Daniel Miller, the head of the Texas nationalist movement, is going to run for the top post basically in Texas. At the same time, announced the exact same week, Louis Marinelli, the head or one of the heads here of the California secessionist movement, is also running for governor, also the top one. Now, both of them decided recently to do this. They were not going to do it earlier, at least last year. And both of them want to use the election as a way to focus on the right of their state to have independence. What's also interesting is that in the article discussing Daniel Miller and in the article discussing Louis Marinelli, they talk about how Texas is looking into this, California, and New Hampshire. So both articles, they talk about New Hampshire, Texas, and California are all legally pursuing secession. That relates to the meeting that we had with those three groups a month ago, where we said that we would all go to the Liberty Fest in New Hampshire. Let me show you the examples right now. So this is Louis Marinelli. This was picked up by Spanish News. It also made the Google the Google search results. If you look for Louis Marinelli, he's going to make the case for national divorce at the 2022 Liberty Forum in New Hampshire. It talks about how he's running, and it talks about how he's going to the Liberty Forum in New Hampshire. And so it's talking about he's going to run for office, and he's working in with other groups across America to do that. We can also take a look at the Daniel Miller article. Daniel Miller is running, and at the bottom of the article, they also point out that in California, Texas isn't the only state that is mulled calling the U.S. quits. In California, the progressive Cal exit movement pushed the Union to flee then-President Donald Trump's reign. The Laconia Daily Sun reported this September that a New Hampshire Republican lawmaker has proposed a constitutional amendment to break free from the federal government. So we have multiple people, at least two. Mike Sylvia in New Hampshire is an elected official pushing secession. Daniel Miller is attempting to be an elected official in Texas to push secession during his campaign. And Louis Marinelli is attempting to be an elected official in California to push secession in his name. So that's key news, and it's coming. And so these are really good times. National divorce is in the news a lot. We have debates with the top polling industry officials in America where they will legitimately debate with us on if this topic is mainstream yet or not. Now, I know we had differences of opinion, but let's think about what's going on. The data is so good that professional polling installations will come to a secessionist organization and have a legitimate debate about how reasonable it is to say if this topic is mainstream yet. At the same time, we are going to approach the first time in American history where people are running for office in multiple states on the topic of secession. Also new. That's all of our news. So let's go to Jason and Robert. Jason, observations, thoughts, and then Robert.
I would say that we definitely we need to work on trying to get the message out there, get the information, the facts out there, to get that 35 to 40 percentile marker moving more up to the 50 to 55. maybe even 55 to 60, just for margin of error. But I would say that we need to focus on that, and things like, Lewis and Mr. Miller both running, that brings some of that spotlight that's needed. I think international connections, when Mr. Zogby had said, the West seems to be a little more international minded anyway. I couldn't help but think about how the United Nations was, like, the idea of it started in Berkeley, and its first home location was San Francisco.
Right.
And only after it became a popular thing that the world was like, oh yeah, this is awesome. Only then did America say, well, we should move the headquarters over here.
Right. Yeah. Against the will of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Everyone else was like, no, man, California is much more neutral ground. It's also nicer weather. Making it, easier for people traveling here internationally to attend world gatherings. But yeah, the other thing I think about with the international stuff is like, okay, so we do have that kind of a feeling here. We've got lots of the younger folk supporting. I think what we might be able to use right now is a lot of young, culturally diverse individuals to come out and start talking about this. Talk about it with your mothers and your brothers and your sisters and your fathers and your teachers, and have a civil discussion with them. Point out the facts. Help educate them as they have helped to educate you.
Yeah.
I think that in tandem with politicians who support self-determination. I just last night I heard some dude on MSNBC, I think it was, talking about the insurrectionists from January 6th, and he's like, yeah, and their values are in line with this and that and this other thing, and self-determination and or self-governance, sorry, and which is self-determination. And I was just like, whoa, don't be so quick to throw self-governance out the window. I mean, don't you value living in America? Sounds like someone on MSNBC feels that we'd be much better under, like, I don't know, Saddam Hussein or something, Muammar Gaddafi, Pinochet.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so with the politicians who support this running, we could get a lot of this youth support to actually push these politicians into varying offices to then very physically manifest and represent this idea and make it happen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Robert, any thoughts? All right, then we're going to end the show. Solid hour. A lot of good information. Thank you all for being here. We'll keep you informed and keep checking us out. We'll go from there. We'll be back here Sunday, every Sunday, covering the news, covering the information, trying to keep the sources to you and making sure that you get the information with references that you need to make an informed decision about the most important discussion Californians can have, and the same discussion the mainstream news won't cover at all. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.